What we're going to do today is give you a look at some of the main firearms that were issued to the military, beginning with the Flintlock and then all the way up to current times. We got Flintlock, Caplock, we got single shots, bolt guns, got the old Garand semi-automatic M14, and we've got high capacity semi-automatic AR-15s, M16s. Okay, so we happen to have a representative sampling pretty much here at the compound of all the main issued rifles, infantry rifles, however you want to look at it. And what we're going to do is give you a look at each one and kind of where it fits. But before we do that, I just can't resist starting out with a shot or two here from this old Flintlock. Let's put a little powder in the pan and see if we can get it to work. It's actually loaded. Let's close the frizzen, point it down range, put my ears on, and see if that watermelon can stop a 75 caliber ball. How's that? If I can hit it. You've seen me shoot this before. All right. Wonder how many watermelons got blown up with brown Besses back in the day. Pretty fun. That's great. That's great. That's what that is. Happens to be a brown Bess. And there are different stories about why it's called a brown Bess, and so we're not sure about that. This is a shorter version of it. So let's just start here. Now what we're going to do, as I said, these are some of the main types of rifles. This is almost a basics video, even though this could become the encyclopedia of videos, right? Because we have so many different firearms. So we're not going to turn into that at all. Wanted to just give people an idea, especially people who are not that familiar with all these different firearms, types of firearms, a little bit about each era and how the progression of firearms, how it evolved, and the technology, and that sort of thing. It's kind of a quick and dirty, but I'm sure it won't be too quick. You know how I am, right? In the 1700s, you know, the Flintlock was the thing. Early 1700s up until the early to mid 1800s, this was high tech. You know, the flint on the lock, and you have seen this. We have videos on these. We will link to the videos, or I will put them in the description. You saw me put the powder in there, and I rammed the ball down the barrel, and that's what you had to do. And you had to keep your flint right, keep it sharp, you cock it, and the flint would hit the frizzen and light the powder. Let's make another spark. See how that goes? See the spark? Lights the powder. Got the little hole there, lights the powder in the chamber, sends the ball out. And that's what happened to that watermelon. That's why he's on the ground right now. Okay? And I said this happened to be the brown Bess. The brown Bess actually was a much longer barrel, generally speaking. This is one of the shorter version of it. For my own purposes, for something to shoot and play with, I don't want that. I mean, the brown Bess, I think, is taller than I am. You know, as with a lot of rifles. I prefer the carbine version, but a lot of the issued rifles were full length, right? So, and this was used, oh man, for about 100 years. This was king, I guess you'd say. It was the British, what they call it, the land pattern musket, and it was used around the world during the expansion of the British Empire. It was very common, of course, in the colonies during the Revolution, the American Revolution. It was used on both sides. But now again, it wasn't the only flintlock that was used. There were others, and I just happened to have this one. Okay, and it was a very common one. So, but that was the technology that was used during the American Revolution. That's the main thing. You know, before this you had the wheel locks and match locks and everything, but during the American Revolution you're primarily dealing with this type of rifle with a flintlock. Okay, 1770s, 1780s, you know, early 1800s. This was it. All right, and that's what they had to deal with. A ball, that's a 75 caliber ball. That's a big old chunk of lead that just went through that watermelon. Okay, so that was the ammunition for it. And you use black powder, smoky and dirty. You can see from one shot, that's very dirty. Okay, so that was that. Reliable, I mean pretty reliable. You got your flint set right and everything, and sharp, you know. So then the progression in the 1830s, 1839, I think, 1840s, they came up with a Caplock. Oop, I don't have a cap out here, but you know, you put a cap on the nipple there, and you do away with the need for flint. So it's kind of a primer. And I have videos on this gun, of course. And you can still use round balls, but they also, during the Civil War era, used the mini ball, developed by a fellow in France. And that's more like a bullet, mini bullet. And that's what I like to shoot in this gun, because this is a Civil War, very common Civil War rifle. This is the 1858 Enfield. And it's much like the the 1862 Springfield, I think, or 64, the Springfield rifle. You know, these are the same. Again, I happen to have the Enfield, but this is representative of what the rifles of that era were like. You know, Caplock. So we're moved from Flintlock to Caplock. Other rifles were made. There are lots of them. Go into, well, look in a history book. Look on the internet. You'll see lots of different types of them. This was very common, though, the Enfield, as was the Springfield. I think the Springfield was used more by the North, and it was used by the South, but the South bought a lot of these from France, or England, rather, and had a lot of the Enfield. Again, they were the longer versions for the most part. You know, 3-band. This is a 2-band. I prefer the shorter ones. So you load the rifle, put the cap on, and you fire. And then you put another cap on. You know, so you didn't have the flint to deal with. However, as long as you had caps, you're okay. With the flintlock, you think, wow, how archaic. But, you know, if you had a piece of flint, you were in business. As long as you had powder, flint, and lead, you were in business. Can you make a cap? Percussion cap? I can't. However, I could pick up a piece of flint maybe and nap it, you know, carve it. Napping is kind of carving, you know, flint, to make it sharp and to make it work. So there's advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so that was well, let's see, 40s, we're talking 1800s now, 40s, 50s, 60s, you know, the Caplock kind of ruled. Now, there were still flintlocks used, even in the Civil War, you know, especially in the South, where they didn't have quite the funding, you know, whatever they could get, a big stick, a knife, a flintlock. So those things showed up everywhere in the South, as I understand. So that's a 58 caliber, and that was a common caliber. There were others firing the mini ball. So Caplock. So we're talking about now. I hope you're picturing, you young folks, kind of. I know because from being a teacher, I know that quite often young people don't have, and I'm sure I was the same way, have a clear picture, you know, of the generations of time going back into the 1700s, the 1800s, and the Civil War. When did it take place? Because you could grab a bunch of teenagers and ask them when the Civil War took place, and if they haven't studied it recently, some of them are liable to say 1937 or something, you know. So we're talking 1860s Civil War. This being a primary rifle, okay, this type of rifle, Caplock, 1860s, okay. Now, the next step was cartridges like this, where you have a case and a self-contained cartridge. You know, not have to load through the muzzle. All right, and that takes us into 1873, the trapdoor Springfield. Now, before we talk too much about that, however, you know, actually during the Civil War and in the 1860s, that was a great time of transition when it comes to firearms, because even during the Civil War, when most soldiers were carrying something like this around on both sides, there were cartridge guns, the little 22s, the Henry rifle you might have seen in movies, lever gun, pretty nice little lever gun. The Spencer, the Sharps carbine, that's, of course, that loaded from the breech with a paper cartridge, I think. But there were lever guns and there were cartridges even in the 60s. It's just that usually the military is a little bit behind, and you're trying to outfit thousands, hundreds of thousands of men, women maybe, mostly men then it's whatever you can do it with, okay? You know, there may be some innovations out there. They're expensive, they're not practical yet on a mass scale. But there were units that actually had the Henry rifle and the Spencer and some of those, you know, lever gun, self-contained cartridges, okay? So in almost every area you have that, okay? But still, we're kind of focusing on what the average infantryman was issued. You know, that's kind of what we're looking at here. There's always the exceptions. So as we move on up into the 1870s, the cartridges have been around, and so the military went to this gun. Okay, this was the adopted rifle of 1873, and that's when the 45-70 came about. See? So you see how that works, and you've seen this in a video. You put the cartridge in there, and you close it up. Okay. Yeah. Now I'm going to fire this, I think. Single shot. Put my ears on. Let's shoot a 2-liter. Has terrible sights. And you cock it, eject it out, and you put another one in. So that was a lot faster than a muzzle loader. Shoot that base, maybe. See? So that's pretty clever. You've seen that before. That's a breech loader. That is a trapdoor. You can see why it's called a trapdoor Springfield. Okay, pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now, before they started manufacturing these in the early 1870s, they took a bunch of these and they cut them out. So there are actually some of these where they converted them to have a trapdoor on them. So it's pretty neat to use a cartridge because there were so many of these around. And you notice they're very similar in design. So that was the big difference. They actually cut some of those out. But this is in 1873. And this was the military rifle for about 20 years. 73 to 93. That was it. Okay, so you see that in the movies. You're watching the westerns, or whatever's going on. If there's a military outfit, they have these either the long version or in the carbine version. The cavalry be carrying usually the carbine. The western movies are full of these, of course. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, that's cool. So this is what the military was carrying, using in 1880, 1885. Think about if you had been living back then, what would you have been carrying? What do you see the cowboys carrying? They're not usually carrying these, are they? They've got a cool 1866 Yellow Boy brass receiver lever gun, or an 1873, or an 1886. See, there were a lot of guns that were further along technologically, but again, this is what the military had issued to them. Okay, 1873, interesting gun. Well, that was black powder now too. There was black powder in those cases, not in the ones I just fired, but we're still black powder with all of these. Good old messy black powder. The first smokeless powder was the Krag right here in 1892, 93. This became the thing. 30 caliber. They changed to a smaller caliber and used smokeless powder. So this was quite an innovation. It's not a big deal to us. Let's put a couple of rounds in it. Well, I'll show you how it feeds. I'm not going to shoot this one necessarily. Remember, I did a video recently on this. You might have seen it. And put it in there, put the safety on, and lock it. Get it out. That is unusual feeding system. Okay, so this was kind of a short-lived gun. It didn't last all that long because we discovered that we liked the Mauser much better. During the Spanish-American War, we encountered those down in Cuba and decided that was cooler and more effective than even this. And this was quite a change. This was the first rifle that we adopted for general issuing that used smokeless powder, the Krag Jorgensen rifle. Okay, kind of a very different sort of loading mechanism. You probably, or many of you might not have seen anything like this if you haven't seen our Krag video we did recently. So that's a pretty interesting rifle. Spanish-American War, 1898, we encountered the Mauser and copied it. And in fact, we paid the Germans for that. As I understand, I saw this on the History Channel one time, talked about how actually during World War I, while we were shooting this gun, the .03 Springfield, at the Germans, we were paying them royalties because we were using, the Mauser action. We had copied it and we're paying royalties. But that's what we did. We realized what a great action that was, and we also, now it started out, and this is the .03 Springfield, chambered in something like 30-03 or something, which was more like, I think, the Krag round, perhaps, and not quite as pointed or powerful. I've never seen one, to tell you the truth. And so the development of a better cartridge was underway there, more like what the Mauser fired, on the 8mm. And we came up with, guess what? I believe the round is still around today, the 30-06. 30-06. So this gun was come up with, I guess you'd say, in 03, is why it's called the .03. But before it was adopted really, and I think in 05, maybe 06, we had developed the 30-06 cartridge. So in 05 and 06. So that's why it's called the .6, the 30 caliber .6. So the .6 in that cartridge has nothing to do with the amount of powder, the length of the cartridge, or anything like that. It's a year that it was adopted, or we came up with it. So 30-06 in the .3. Okay, so the gun kind of dates back to 1903, and it fires the 30-06. Now this particular gun, it's a Springfield, and this is a recent pickup I've acquired. I've always wanted one of these, finally have it, and it's a Springfield, and it's the serial number dates it, takes it to 1918. And it was rebarreled in 1942. So it's a neat one. I like it. And it's a sweet. In fact, let's shoot the thing. I've not tried the clips. Let's see if I can use them. I usually challenge. Hey, that was pretty smooth, wasn't it? Okay, let's get some ears on. Take a couple shots for this thing. All right. Go across the hill. Wow. High. That's a hard hitting gun. 30-06. Pretty nice. Now this gun has a long history. It started in, again, 03, first part of the 1900s, 20th century, and it is the rifle. Good old bolt gun, comparable to the Mauser. We had it, great gun, very accurate, a sweetie, and it was used in World War I. This was our rifle, World War I, and then even in World War II, still in use. Okay, even though the Garand came along, this gun was still in use to a great extent, really, because we couldn't make enough Garands, and there were units that used this for various reasons. We'll go into all that. As a sniper rifle, it's used on up into the 60s and 70s, scoped out. So great rifle, famous for being accurate, and a beloved rifle, no doubt about it. The Springfield .3. I kind of wanted a Springfield. This one was made by Springfield. There were some Remingtons and other companies that made them, but I wanted a Springfield and a pretty nice version of it. So this is a cool gun. So that's kind of the history of that. So that was for a long time the adopted rifle, right up into the Garand days, and then still used beyond that. That takes us to the Garand. Again, 30-06. Garand fires the same cartridge, doesn't it? And this is that beautiful rifle. You've seen this in action, I hope. I've got the bayonet on it. I thought I probably wouldn't shoot it. Now this Garand bayonet fits on the .3 too. The .3 came with a longer bayonet, and then they shortened it a little bit, cut them down some by the time we got into the late 30s. This takes us to the late 30s is when the Garand came along. Invented by John Garand. He actually pronounced his name Garand, but everybody calls it Garand, right? Kind of like carbine, Garand, Garand. People look at you kind of funny if you call it a Garand rifle. But it is the Garand, it is the Garand, and late 30s, and of course that puts us in World War II, doesn't it? So this was the primarily battle rifle, along with the .3, World War II. So that was our first semi-automatic rifle, the first semi-automatic rifle I believe ever issued to an army, ever, and that was the good old United States. Made a difference. Our soldiers really like that. It's heavy. All these guns are heavy. They're hard kickers. 30-06. They're not for the faint of heart, but they're great shooters. Nothing like the character in that gun for sure. So that took us up into the 50s when the M14 was developed. It was just a continuation of the M1. Basically changed the gas system a little bit, and it takes a detachable magazine. As you know, you've seen the M14, the M1A, and I think there were even some Garands where they experimented with that on. So with the M14, you have a magazine with 20 rounds, you know, and we changed the cartridge as well. It's about the same ballistically as a 30-06, but it's a little bit shorter. And you may not have the upward potential. If you're loading or hand loading, you could maybe crank up a 30-aught a little warmer. But as far as the military round, they're essentially the same, but it's shorter. Let's take a couple shots of this thing. What a nice gun. You know what? We got a watermelon left. We almost forgot about him. That took care of him, didn't it? Wow. Let's shoot that water, or that 2 liter. That's enough for that, I guess. That round later. Okay, so detachable magazine, big difference there. And just a sweet rifle. This rifle is still in use today. 57, it was used in Vietnam in the 60s, in early 70s. It's still used by some units today. I understand in the Navy quite extensively, and it's just, we have a lot of these in the warehouses, I think, and they pull them out, and various units still use that gun to this day. It is a well-liked firearm. Okay, so the semi-automatic, we went from the Garand to a detachable magazine, and we're still in a big caliber. Well, then you know what happened. Vietnam's going on. Eugene Stoner with Armorlights working on an AR-10 in the same caliber, 308, in a gun that looks like this, and that would be in the 60s. And lo and behold, before you know it, we have something like this in our hands, made from aircraft aluminum. And actually, the first ARs were called AR-15s. That's what Stoner called it. But when we chambered it for the 5.56 round, we designated it as the M16 in the select fire mode. And that's what you have right here. Now, this is an A2, and I don't have one of the old ones, the Vietnam era. Like I say, the guns that I have, I brought out. And I happen to have everything almost, that except for the Krag, that pretty well represents that era. And this is as close as I can get. This is an A2, early A2, and it's aluminum and plastic and polymer, and so this was a big switch. For those of you who have been around a while, you might remember, or any of you might have read about the resistance to this gun, because when it was issued initially, it had some problems, mainly because of the ammo. We were loading it with the wrong powder, and it was causing hang-ups. We weren't chroming the chamber. Changed the load, started chroming the chambers and barrels too, I guess, and finally told the GIs, yeah, you do need to clean it. I think initially they were told they wouldn't even have to clean these things. This is really space age. No need to clean it, just shoot it, you know. Well, that's not true. So once they started lubing them correctly, got them chrome lined, and got good ammo, not so many problems. Worked a lot better. So this was the weapon. Now when we started the Vietnam era, we were, it was the M14, and M1 carbines and things like that, and even a few Garands. But then in the 60s, the transition began there, and that's the way it is in every era, every war. There's always that transition period where some units have this gun, others don't, so it's hard to talk about. This is the gun that was used in that war, or during that war, we used this gun, because there's always that gray area in the transitional periods, and even as the gun evolves. So, but this is what we think of in the Vietnam era, with the triangular forearm and everything, and the skinny barrels. So the AR-15, the M16, and that was quite a switch, wasn't it? So that takes us all the way into the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the Marines, and just everybody. AR-15 pretty much, except for certain units still, carrying or using the M14 and a mixture of other things as the main rifle. And then of course this gun, as it evolved into something like the M4 nowadays, and for several years now, when you see soldiers, you see soldiers, they're carrying a smaller AR, aren't they, or M16, an M4 as it's typically called, that collapsible stock, shorter barrel, and just a handier piece. Let's take a couple shots with it. It's one of my favorites. See what we have here. We have another 2 liter we got to take out. Well, I'll tell you what, they want to attack me. I see a big 5-gallon jug of water here too. Might need to work on him a little bit. Nice. What else did I leave? Oh, I left a red plate over there. So these work too. They work quite well, and they shoot that little bitty 5.56 round, but it's very fast and can be very effective. Sorry, I didn't mean to desecrate the Civil War rifle there with a 5.56 round. So the M4 is kind of where we end up today. Flintlock, you know, Revolutionary War up into the early 1800s, 1840, 50, and you get in the Caplock era where you're just putting a cap on the nipple, still loading from the muzzle up through the Civil War. Then as the Civil War is going on, technology is increasing, everybody's working on the best guns. You got lever guns, you got cartridges being developed in the 60s, both pistols and rifles. And then in the 70s comes to fruition, more or less, where even the adopted military rifle is a cartridge gun. And then the bolt guns, and right up to the semi-automatics. Okay, so these are some sweet guns. There's a lot of history there, as you can tell. It gets me excited, and I know I probably left out some things. Well, I left out, as I say, 4 or 5 encyclopedias. I just wanted to give you a rundown. I meant for it to be more of a basics for people who maybe don't even have a notion what kind of firearm was used during the Revolutionary War, or what was used in the Spanish-American War, or what the guys were carrying, you know, in the Civil War.